So I've made this point before, but I think I just have to repeat myself. And that's because it seems that most people don't get it. The point is that as ordinary beings, when we experience suffering and hardship, we do that which only makes the situation worse. We do that which exacerbates the situation. The definition, or one of the definitions, of an ordinary being is a being that seeks happiness and tries to avoid suffering, but pursues that happiness by engaging in negativity. So invests themselves in the causes of suffering, expecting that to bring about happiness. And that's exactly what we do. And so in a recent video about the decline of the American empire, I stressed this point, but I just use politics as an example. What this is our human nature, our tendency. For example, for many working class people, when they get into debt, what they do is resort to taking a loan. And as we know, when we take a loan, we only make the situation worse because we lose more money. We feel as if this might buy us some time. But in the end, what happens is our debt just increases. And this is obvious because in the West, and most Western countries, are now seriously in debt. For example, I think America's debt
is 122% of its GDP.
It's a totally unmanageable situation. And this is what happens when the economy of an empire starts to decline. They look for ways to remedy this, and one of these ways is to borrow more money. But in the end, it's what brings them down, what brings about their own downfall. I mean, there are many examples of how we do this. Many people, when they're feeling stressed or tired, what they do is they resort to alcohol, smoking cigarettes, or taking substances to make them feel better. But over time, we only become more dependent on those. And in the end, for most people, not everyone, then it only makes the depression or the stress worse. Smoking is a really good example of this. You'll hear people who are addicted to smoking cigarettes, they'll say things like, "Oh, I feel stressed, better have a cigarette." The truth is, they feel stressed because they haven't had a cigarette for a certain amount of time. And the addiction is kicking in. That's making them feel stressed. And so they go and have a cigarette to relax. But that cigarette ultimately is going to make them more stressed. And eventually it will lead to health problems, right? And also potentially will kill them, bring about cancer. And this cancer is a really good example of this, what I'm going to say here, because we are willing to undergo invasive surgery, chemical therapy, in order to defeat a cancer. So in the short term, we're willing to go through hardship. If somebody were to attack me with a knife and cut me, we see that to be a bad thing. I don't want it. But if I have a tumor, then I will pay a surgeon to cut that out. So I think with things like cancer, for example, terminal cancer, we're so afraid for our life that we're willing to do something. But when it comes to other things that are kind of equally dangerous, we don't apply the same mentality that is willing to sacrifice in the short term for long-term gains. And the biggest example of this is the environment. Really, we're in a drastic situation, but what everybody's saying, or most people are saying is, well, it's going to be too much hardship in the short term, so we can't really try to mitigate the causes of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and so we'll just have to leave it. That's where we are at the moment. But the long-term consequences of this are going to be absolutely disastrous. In fact, what we're doing is we're doing the opposite. We're increasing oil production and forgetting about the COP agreement, etc. And so what this will do is it will only make our situation worse. So that's just an example, and I've used that example before. And part of being a confused, ordinary sentient being is that when we see trouble, when we see hardship, what we do is we try to mitigate the results. And so the analogy I often use is, for example, if you have a leaky tap in the bathroom. So it's leaking and it's running all over the floor. It would be crazy just to clean up the mess on the floor and ignore the leaky tap, right? Just to continually wipe up the spill and not look for the source. But that's really what we do. What you need to do is you need to fix that leaky tap, and then it won't drip on the floor anymore. And then secondary to that, then you can clean up the mess. But what we do is the opposite. And so the example I gave in the video was immigration. And the point of the video was that when empires are in decline, And when they're going through their death throes, what they do is that which will only make things worse. And so I mentioned immigration in that. And that triggers a lot of people because then they make comments. They say, well, what about mass immigration? It's so terrible. The point is we're not dealing with the cause of the issue. We're just looking for solutions to the results, the consequences of prior actions. And in the past, historically, then empires, civilizations have repeatedly tried to do this. We have two very good examples. In northern England, we've got Hadrian's Wall, and in China, we have the Great Wall of China. And these, you could say, were to control immigration. They were to make the borders of the empire more secure. But what we know from history is that the walls didn't really do anything. The borders of the empire were porous. Part of the reasons why the borders of the empire are porous is because empires are so huge. They have to expand. They have to increase their revenue. And so they invade their neighbors, they expand their borders, the borders become porous, and then people start flooding in. So how is it we got to this situation? The ignorant amongst us think that this all happened in Biden's presidency. And it didn't happen before that, which is completely foolish. It's an issue that's been going on in the United States of America for decades and decades. And globally, the situation is definitely getting worse. So the question is, why are there so many immigrants? All we're trying to do is like build walls, right? I haven't really heard Trump mention much about building the wall recently. I don't know if they're actually doing any building of the wall, but that was his solution, right? Close the border, build a big wall. It's all Biden's fault. But it's been going on for decades. If we look at the numbers, then we've got 4 million people displaced in Iraq for whatever reason. 2 million Cubans, perhaps. And as we know, Cuba has been under a very strict embargo by the United States of America since the 60s. 1 million from El Salvador alone. 1 million from Nicaragua. 8 million displaced people from Venezuela. 10 million displaced Afghans. 2 million Palestinians. These are all figures I've got off the internet. I don't know how accurate they are, but there's certainly millions is correct. 5 million displaced from Iran. And a really important point here, 250 million people displaced, that's internally or externally, from climate crisis. 95 million people displaced because of famine. This is all in our modern times, in the last 50 years or so. And 12 million of those come from Sudan alone. The question is, why is this happening? Well, there are many contributing factors. There's sort of 3 types of people, maybe 4 types of people. There are one-dimensional thinkers, and they're the worst of the lot. There are 2-dimensional thinkers, there are 3-dimensional thinkers, and they're what I call 4-dimensional thinkers. That sounds a bit confusing. An example of a one-dimensional thinker is somebody who only cares about themselves. They don't give a shit about good or bad or anything else like that. It's got nothing to do with morals. They're just totally self-centered. And so that one dimension is me, 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 me. This is really the cause of all our suffering in the world. So those are the narcissists. For example, like Trump. He doesn't really have his own morals. He doesn't have any kind of moral clarity or moral standards. He's only interested in what he can get out of something. Whether it's good or bad is irrelevant. There are 2-dimensional thinkers, and most people these days are 2-dimensional thinkers. And those are people with very strong ideas of good or bad. And so they tend to try to blame somebody for something. And like our side is good, their side is bad, Christianity is good, other religions are bad. This kind of way of thinking. It leads to polarization. Most people are like this. They're very tribal, small-minded. They've got a very strong sense of good or bad. But of course, good and bad is relative in many ways. Probably the most people are like this. And 3-dimensional thinkers are more rare. 3-dimensional thinkers are people who realize that there are many causes and conditions that come together to create a situation. It's not black and white. And these sort of people tend to do well at science, tend to be fairly well educated, or they potentially could be very well educated. And they don't see things to be black or white. So people who do statistical research and scientific research, they have to be like this. Physicists, for example. You can't just jump to conclusions. And when it comes to what I say 4-dimensional thinkers, that's kind of a strange term, but these are extremely rare. These are people who are able to grasp the meaning of emptiness, for example. They're able to grasp inner meaning of quantum physics. These are extremely rare. We can maybe understand the theories associated with emptiness and quantum physics, but those people who are really able to grasp the deep and profound subjects are extremely rare. And so we have figures like Einstein, Hawking, these sorts of people. And we're not expected to be like that. it would be good if we weren't two-dimensional thinkers and we were three-dimensional thinkers. But in general, the two-dimensional thinkers, the ones who have a very strong sense of good or bad, then they have very strong opinions about science, for example. And this is another example of how we kind of make our own situation worse. For instance, during COVID, then many people were very strongly triggered by either the regulations or the restrictions that were imposed upon them. But the situation at the time was complex. It was a new disease, and nobody really knew much about it. And on top of that, then the powers that be, the government and the scientists, had to come up with solutions in a very short period of time. And for them, they were struggling because it was something new. But the two-dimensional thinkers judge these other people very quickly. And so it's kind of laughable because you hear people who don't really have a good grasp of high school physics and science, but at the same time, they feel like they're able to judge the entire scientific community in regards to climate crisis, in regards to immunology, these things that are actually very complex in which there are many, many contributing factors. And so when it comes to immigration, it's the same. In fact, what's happened over probably a century is that America has been interfering in politics all over the world. I mean, as I said, there were 10 million people displaced from Afghanistan. They invaded Iraq. They interfered in Nicaragua for years. In South America, as we know, the CIA has been fueling coups. And currently, what we're doing is just trying to build walls. As I said, historically, these walls never work. Along with trying to build walls, in other words, trying to shut people out, then at the same time, what we've been doing is withdrawing from soft power. And what is soft power? Well, that's like the World Health Organization, these charitable foundations that are there to stop the tide of malaria and AIDS in third world countries. Of course, if there's more famine, if there's more disease, if their governments and civilizations are destabilized by foreign interference, then there's going to be more refugees. And I think it's Kennedy who came up with the brilliant idea of soft power, this mentality that believes there are only winners or losers, and that there is no such thing as a win-win solution, has been clearly debunked in the modern era. What we've seen is that if you exercise soft power, you yourselves not only profit or benefit, but others do as well. And of course, if we still cared about what happened to people in other countries, if we still did our best to reduce the effects of climate change, to stabilize the economies of other people, not our people, but others, if we exercise our compassion on a global scale, then this will lead to a reduction in people seeking to migrate to other countries. It will also decrease displacement, whether that's internal or external. Unfortunately, what we seem to be returning to is an adversarial economic policy. It's a bit like mercantilism, imposing tariffs on others or bullying them in order to force them to play your game the way you want it. But this will no longer work. The source of our suffering is our greed. This is really the problem. In general, the working class people are pretty much happy to subsist, to have enough food to eat, a roof over their head, and a certain amount of freedom. However, those with ambition and greed are never satisfied. No matter how rich you are, you will never be happy. And I know this myself from personal experience. When I was younger, I used to work for some very rich people. And it seemed that the richer somebody was, then the more they needed and the less happy they were. They worry about their money all the time. The truth is that our world and our peace of mind is being consumed by our desire. And this was the fundamental point that the Buddha made, that the source of all suffering, the source of our mundane existence is our desire, never being satisfied. And we have this mentality that we will be content as long as we get what we want. But that is not the case. We will be content once we learn to be of few desires and easily satisfied. To be content with what we have, then the world will become a better place. So anyway, these were just a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you this evening. The point is, unless we learn to overcome our greed, our continual wanting and desiring more and more, then we will never find peace or happiness on this earth. So do your best to develop gratitude and contentment, and in that way, transcend mundane suffering. Until next time, and see you later.